I love old movies. Specifically, I love old horror movies. When as a young child, my dad had me watch Watcher in the Woods with an older Betty Davis, to watching Saturday Night at the Movies with Elway Yost and Universal horror monsters. From Frankenstein to Dracula to The Invisible Man, I couldn't stop. But when I was 11, it takes me back to a specific time when I went to a friend's birthday party and an older brother popped in the VCR, 1974, Tobe Hooper's classic, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Boy, can I still see the glint and the hook where one of the characters was about to be hooked into. And that hammer that Leatherface drops down on the man coming in through the door. It had me hooked. Horror is one of those genres that you just can't keep your eyes away from. Love it or hate it, you're never going to forget it. And it set me along on my horror journey. From Texas Chainsaw, to Jaws, to Italian horror, to Hammer horror films, to the slashers, and to the modern films of today with their supernatural entities. There are so much horror involved. Italian horror with Barbara Steele. Hammer horror with Ingrid Pitt, ooh la la. From the slashers of Jamie Lee Curtis to the modern whodunits with Lynn Shay. Women in horror have been strong, and horror have always played a part of my life. From one Canuck to another, I love old horror movies.
Hello, film historians. I'm Derek, and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to our 10th episode spectacular.
An extravaganza, really.
A giant-sized special, like those $1 comics from back in the 70s.
Ah, yes. Packed full of value, those were. I remember them well. I still have a bunch.
Well, that's what this show is going to be like. Jammed with value and twice as long.
And packed with guests.
So many guests.
All the guests.
We just heard one of them.
We sure did. Reading our cold open today was Bill Van Veghel. Bill is a podcaster that actually lives not too far from us. He got in touch and offered to help us out with the intro this week.
He did a pretty good job.
The dude's a pro. He's probably forgotten more about podcasting than we'll ever know.
Bill is actually part of 2 podcasts, where he co-hosts, both with a focus on horror films, with some sci-fi and fantasy thrown in for good measure.
That is the best of all measures.
Right.
So check Bill out on Land of the Creeps and also on Phantom Galaxy. We've left the link to those in the description for this episode. Thanks for being part of the show, Bill.
And while we're on the topic of special guests and our cold opens, this is the sort of thing that you would like to do. Please get in touch with us.
All of our episodes start with a cold open where Sam or I,
or Bill,
right, talk about a personal narrative, a history we have with film, how it influenced and shaped us at specific points in our lives. It's nostalgia meet film history, really.
But maybe that's the sort of thing that's happened to you, and maybe you'd like to share that story. We'd love to involve you and give you an avenue for that.
You don't have to have a podcast. That's okay.
Maybe you didn't grow up in a small town in the Ottawa Valley. That's okay too.
But bonus points if you did.
Obviously.
So if you'd like to tell your story, perhaps as soon as the next episode, definitely get in touch with us and we will make it happen pronto.
Perhaps we should tell them how to get in touch.
Perhaps we should.
You can reach us on the Facebook,
I Love Old Movies the Podcast.
The Instagram,
I Love Old Movies the Podcast.
or with a good old-fashioned email,
I Love Old Movies the Podcast @gmail.com.
all one word.
And while you're doing that, consider taking a moment to hit like, subscribe, and share on this episode, and maybe even leave a comment.
You giving us that feedback is the best way for us to not only continuously improve the show, but also to keep putting it in front of more people and giving them a chance to listen and find out what we're all about.
So if you are enjoying this, then definitely do that.
It would be cool of you.
Elvis level cool.
Elvis 68 comeback special cool.
Now that is pretty cool. Speaking of specials, should we get on with things?
Probably.
So, back in episode 3, we briefly touched on the idea of a Mount Rushmore of horror movie actors, and we decided that it would be a good idea to base a whole episode around this idea, get some guests in, and really gather some opinions, evaluate the choices made, and come up with a master list. The official I Love Old Movies Mount Rushmore of horror actors.
Now, we know this isn't an original idea. There's a Mount Rushmore of everything these days.
Absolutely.
But this is our list. It will apply to nothing but our show, and since it won't exactly be carved into the face of a mountain, we can change it later, anytime we want.
It is a living list, and I imagine we might come back to it from time to time. And even better, if this sort of discussion and format works, we could use it again in the future for similar debates.
Silent film performers.
Film noir directors.
Characters from Planet of the Apes films.
Screenwriters from... Wait, what?
Yeah.
Would anyone possibly be on that list other than Cornelius, Zira, Dr. Zaius, and Taylor?
Oh, that's why we might have to do a show about it.
All right. Fair enough. So for today's episode, we have brought in a number of guests that are going to give you their picks for your consideration. We have my wife.
My mom.
Nikki Weatherdon. Nikki is a huge film and comic fan.
Guys, they totally met in a comic store.
That is true. And she's also involved in community theater, both on stage and off. She hears all the chats we have, and she has some pretty good opinions on all this. And I think her list is going to be excellent.
And how? Our next guest is Adam Martignetti, an actor, comedian, and content provider for Collider.com, and a frequent collaborator of ours for live theater projects, and a great friend.
And
Acting friend!
guesting on our podcast, friend! And he's an online gaming buddy that we play Sea of Thieves with. You know, we should Twitch that sometime.
Oh boy. The problem is all three of us play video games like we're Jim from The Office.
Sam, dropping truth by the barrelful today. After Adam, we'll hear from Addison Wylie. Addison is a film reviewer and is the guiding force behind WylieWrites.com, which you should be checking out.
The link is in the episode description. And our last guest will be Mallory Jacobson from Movie Lovers Podcast, in which she and her partner force each other to watch movies they probably don't want to, and then discuss them.
When you absolutely need to hear a couple go back and forth over the merits of the Jean-Claude Van Damme filmography, this is the podcast for you. Seriously, check them out.
Linked in the description.
You know, this is quite a lineup.
It really is. But how are we doing this exactly?
Yes. Our methodology. Well, it's very scientific.
For science.
And it will basically have no margin of error.
Well, I would expect so.
All four of our guests, plus Sam and I, will offer up our list for our top 5 picks to go on the Mount Rushmore. We have to be able to justify and qualify these picks somewhat, and not just use, well, I like him or her as a reason.
There's got to be some meat there.
And potatoes. We want considered opinions. They're making an argument and really hopefully convincing you, the listener, that their picks are the right ones.
Why 5 picks? There's only 4 spots on Mount Rushmore.
Really just to put more names into the debate. I expect there will be some crossover, but the more names we have to discuss, the more possible variety. And variety, as they say, is the spice of life.
And then everyone's picks are point valued, right?
Right. Everyone's picks are submitted in order, 1 through 5. Their number 1 pick gets 5 votes, number 2 gets 4, and so on. When everyone's votes are in, we total the points, and then we have our top 4.
What if there's a tie?
Well, there won't be.
But what if there is?
There can't be.
Pretty sure that math allows for that possibility.
Sure, but if there's a tie for first or for last, who cares? It wouldn't affect anything. I guess if there's a tie for 4th, that could be sticky.
Coin toss?
Works for me.
Okay, so then are you going to get us underway?
I sure am. Back when we first mentioned this idea, I threw out a name as someone I felt would be an automatic on such a list, and I'm sticking by that one. My first pick is the man of 1,000 faces, Lon Chaney Sr. In an era when being a film star, creating movies, and the lasting iconography was just beginning, just being figured out, Chaney stood out like no one in his day and age, and like very few since. I'm a big fan of the people who do things first and create a new way of thinking and performing that others will spend years, decades, even now a century building off of. Imitated, but not duplicated. Renowned, but rarely top of mind. And absolutely indispensable to the history of film, particularly horror film, Chaney built a career around crafting the sort of performances and creating the kind of character visuals that we still feel the influence of today. He's an automatic, inarguable inclusion on this list for me. Number 2 and 3 were basically interchangeable, so the deciding factor had to be the quality of their performances and films outside of their most iconic works. Of course, I'm talking about Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. Both had extensive careers dominated by appearances in horror genre films, and both have an iconic character on their resume. Lugosi is Dracula. Karloff is Frankenstein's monster. Everyone else was trying desperately to either mimic them or be so different as to avoid any comparison whatsoever. When you are so good at creating a character that no one wants to do it anything like you because they know the second they get compared, the comparison will not be favorable, that is being an icon. And these two are. So who's 2 and who's 3? Karloff had a longer career, but aside from The Grinch, I have trouble immediately coming up with another great performance from him. After Dracula, Lugosi had Igor in Son of Frankenstein, which was amazing. He also played a key role in The Wolfman, and even his films with Ed Wood were so deliriously weird and his performance is so wild. He totally went for it, all the time, always willing to show what a great performer he was. There's no doubt in my mind that he was the better actor between the two, so Bela gets my nod, and Karloff comes in number 3. Number 4 is Christopher Lee. Even if all he ever did were the Hammer films, where he played Dracula, and the Monster, and the Mummy, that would be enough. But he kept making films from the 1950s into the 2000s, putting forth a body of work that few can match or equal. What I love about Lee, in addition to tales of his adventures in World War II, was that he wasn't a true leading man in appearance nor acting range, but was a true horror movie actor. He played every character he did as a horror movie character, and that's right up until the end. His characters drip with menace and inspire dread. His take on Count Dooku or Saruman or Willy Wonka's father are every bit as threatening as when he played the Hammer monsters, maybe even more so. Of everyone on my list, there is no doubt that he produced the best overall body of work, and that's why he's here. Lastly, at number 5, I'm making what I expect will be a choice that might raise a few eyebrows, but I feel I can justify it. I'm going with Robert Englund, famous for playing Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street series of films. Now, full disclosure, I'm not really a fan of Englund, nor these movies, but the fact is that from 1978 to the early 2000s, the horror movie landscape was largely dominated by 3 film franchises, and their respective iconic villains. Of course, I'm referring to Halloween with Michael Myers, Friday the 13th with Jason Voorhees, and Nightmare on Elm Street. While Michael and Jason are interesting monsters, they have 2 disadvantages here. They're very one-dimensional as characters, and were played by a series of actors over the course of their franchises. Englund, however, imbued Freddy Krueger with a gleeful degree of evil and malice, making audiences excited about what he would say next, as much as what he would do next. And Englund was so deeply connected to the role that although he made some other, and lesser, horror films, he always just seemed to be that guy from Nightmare on Elm Street. Actors crafting portrayals of original characters who became legitimate icons is increasingly rare, and Englund may be one of the last, best examples.
That is a killer list.
Thank you. But guess what? It is your turn.
Oof. Could we actually listen to some guests first?
And now it's time for us to bring our first proper guest onto the show. For the first time ever, we have someone sitting in with us now and sharing their ideas about films. Who else could it be but my wife, Sam's mom, Nikki Weatherdon. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks for being here, Mom.
Thank you. I think it's about darn time I was here.
Well, there we have it. So you know what we're doing. You know what this episode's all about. And you have a list for us.
I do. Harder than I thought. When you first mentioned this, I thought, oh, this will be so easy. 5 people, got it. And my list has changed right up until we hit record.
Oh, so this is like very hot off the presses, you might say.
I think if I got to do my legit Mount Rushmore, there'd probably be about 10 people on it. Maybe 12.
I see.
So it was hard.
We're only taking 4, so you've got you're getting the chance to lay it down first. I've shared my picks. Sam's are going to come a little later in the
5.
show. Well, yes, but only 4 are going to make the Mount Rushmore in the end.
Final cut.
Of course.
Final
okay,
cut.
good.
But everyone's putting in 5. I've put in my 5, and you're going to do your 5 now. Sam's are coming a little bit later in the show. And we're very looking forward to hearing what you got. So go ahead and lay it on us.
I'm going to go backwards and start with my 5th choice because the 5th person has the lowest number of votes, right?
That's right.
Okay, and I'm going to work my way up to 1, and I'll be upfront about it. I put my number 1 very strategically as number 1. I'm not sure this person deserves to be number 1, but I feel so passionate about their inclusion on Mount Rushmore, I needed to give them as many votes as possible.
I see.
Smart.
Gaming the system a little bit. I like it.
You'll hear. It's good.
Okay.
I think.
Take it away.
So at number 5, I have Robert Englund. Not probably the vastest amount of work, but he owns that character. You don't have Nightmare on Elm Street without Freddy, and you don't have Freddy without Robert Englund. I'm pretty sure, and you would know this better than I would, but I think they tried to reboot the series without him.
Yeah, right, with Jackie Earle Haley.
I've never
Freddy.
heard of that before.
That's who they used, Jackie Earle Haley?
Yeah.
Rorschach.
Yeah. Rorschach, yeah.
Whoa, I can't imagine that.
Well, neither could anyone else, because I'm pretty sure it tanked abominably.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you can take a character and make it so iconic that nobody else can do it, at least while you're still living,
yeah,
kudos. You
Yeah.
own it, right?
Totally with
So
you
he's
there.
my number 5.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Number 4 is Vincent Price.
I
Again,
see.
little hard to include him sometimes. Not the world's best actor.
Mm,
A little campy.
yeah.
Okay, a lot campy. But he's pretty much the only actor I know of who's been referred to multiple times over multiple decades as the master of horror.
Sure.
So he was in a lot of horror movies. He, even based on being the master of horror, he got to do that little poem in the middle of Thriller.
Sure, yeah.
Michael Jackson's Thriller. And that was always the best part with Vincent Price coming in. So I think he earned it.
Yeah, and of course, Canadian viewers of or listeners of a certain age will remember the hilarious House of Frightenstein, made in the early 1970s out of Hamilton, that featured Vincent Price doing introductory poem vignettes for all the characters in all the episodes in the show.
Didn't they blow their whole budget on getting him?
Yeah, he cost all the money. They flew him over. He shot everything in one day and then went home.
I remember growing up loving him, and he was the horror icon of my childhood, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good pick. I expected to hear his name. I'm predicting we're going to hear it again over the course of the show. So he's in at number 4. Who do you have at 3?
3, I've got Christopher Lee, Sir Christopher Lee.
Hmm.
Big body of work. He stuck around for a really long time. I mean, he was in Star Wars, the prequels, which we won't talk about those, but his character was definitely a horror character.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, he thought it was a horror character. Saruman is definitely a horror character.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And every second Christopher Lee is on the screen is terrifying and beautiful and wonderful. And that's not even getting into his history with Dracula's and just being the horror guy.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, absolutely. Christopher Lee was on my list as well.
Love him. At number 2, Bela Lugosi. He has a huge body of work, and I believe in horror it's still pretty big. Hard to believe he only played Dracula, twice?
Right?
Yeah, only 2 times.
My mind boggles at that.
How is that possible?
Yeah.
His name is synonymous with Dracula.
He is Dracula.
Yeah.
Well, and then you can't forget, you guys did Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein and Igor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks Igor's in the first one, based on how amazingly Bela Lugosi portrayed him.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you and I are really clearly you've heard us talking about this. Your list and mine are so similar. I've got Bella at number 2 as well. Now, this concerns me though about your number 1, because I I'm just going to say it. You haven't said Boris Karloff yet.
I know. I have been thinking that. Where is Boris Karloff?
And I'm if you're
Honorable
putting Boris Karloff number one,
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
We're going to talk about this later. So you know what? Can we just leave Bela Lugosi alone for a minute? Let's just get to your number one and have that argument right now.
Give it to us straight.
I hope your listeners, one of them is a good divorce attorney, because I'm pretty sure you're going to divorce me, because it's not Boris.
Oh no.
Well, wait, it's
hard
not
to
Boris
leave
Karloff?
It was hard to leave him off my top 5.
How could you?
Well, he went on and off and on and off, and he was on it up until 5 minutes before you pressed record. But I couldn't let Christopher Lee not be on the list either. It was hard. And Lon Chaney. There are so many. You see?
Well, wait a minute. Then who's your number one?
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Okay, so bear with me, everyone, please, for a second. Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh.
Right? First of all, I think most of the time when you're talking about horror movie actors, and we have over the years, female names don't get mentioned a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
They're usually the damsel in distress, or they have their archetypes. They all get killed off.
Mm-hmm.
Everything like that. Jamie Lee Curtis, okay, so she wasn't the very first Scream Queen. I believe Fay Wray might claim that one. I don't know. But she's really only famous as a Scream Queen for one film.
Yeah, I agree.
Jamie Lee, multiple.
Yeah.
Multiple films. Halloween, Prom Night, which became very much the golden standard for a while for your slashers. And so we get our Scream Queen that really takes on a whole life of its own. Even though the concept existed before her, she takes it to this whole other level. And we get the wonderful trope of the final girl.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that can be traced right back to Jamie Lee Curtis. And I think we don't get, if we don't have Jamie Lee Curtis in things like Halloween and Prom Night, we're not getting our final girl trope. We're not getting that wonderful scene in Scream where
we're not getting Scream at all.
Right.
Really.
Well, we're not. You're not getting Scream, and you're not getting the wonderful rules of horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
She figures so prominently in all of them. You always know who your final girl is going to be based on whether she disrobes on screen.
Yeah, right. It gets drunk.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, sure.
Right? Jamie Lee Curtis has a fantastic figure, and you're not going to see it in a horror flick.
That's true.
She survives, and that becomes a rule for horror movies going forward. And I just think her importance cannot be, it can't be turned away. You can't ignore it. I think she's key to a lot of the horror movies from the late 70s on.
That's a heck of a pick.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, why you put her number one. You really want to get the 5 points for her.
I see what you mean now, for sure.
I don't see her being on a whole lot of people's lists. She's not who comes to mind first.
That's a really, and you know what, with the new Halloween film coming out, Halloween Kills, is coming out
15th.
On the 15th, October 15th. So by the time people are listening to this podcast, really, that movie is just about here, or may already be out by the time they're listening. Definitely go see that one, because the one that came out a few years ago was excellent.
Yes.
And Jamie Lee
There'll
Curtis,
be a third one.
Yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis still has it totally too. And I love her connection to Hollywood royalty as well. She's got the parents.
And her career's huge. Like, she has, and not just in horror films.
No.
Right. She's spun out and done drama, comedy, action, mystery. I mean, she was just in that Knives Out film.
Yeah. And you can go back and look at things like she did A Fish Called Wanda, or True Lies. Like, there's a lot of really great movies in her catalog for sure.
Exactly. But she really started in horror, and you can kind of say she's come back to it with these new Halloween films. She's gone right back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And they're just as big as they were then. And
well, those are excellent picks. Excellent.
Thank you.
You've definitely given me a lot to think about.
For sure. For
Yay.
sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I guess we'll see you around the house later.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you'll see me soon.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
Thank you.
Our next guest on the podcast is Adam Martignetti. He is a content provider for Collider.com and a good friend of Sam and I. How you doing, Adam?
I am doing well. How are you guys doing?
We're good.
Yeah,
Welcome
we're
to the
pretty
show.
good.
That's good. Thanks for having me.
So you have your list of iconic horror movie actors that you are going to present to us for your selection onto our Mount Rushmore.
All right. So here they are. The first name is Jim Varney, who played most famously Ernest of the Ernest films. In 1991, they made an Ernest Scared Stupid film, which was a film for children, ostensibly, and it had a lasting effect on a lot of people, including myself, growing up. That movie was very scary. It was all about a troll kind of thing that came to life, and I think it put kids into a tree because it was planted on something happened, and the only way to defeat it was with milk. Ernest was saving the people. He was the hero,
right,
and he was the titular scared stupid. There's a moment in that film where a kid they're in their bedroom and they're lying on their bed, and they kind of have this moment of like, wait a second, I never checked under the bed. And so the camera follows them as they lean over the bed and they look down, and you can see under the bed, and there's nothing there. And then the camera follows them back up to lie back down onto the bed, and the troll is on the bed lying beside where they will be. And we don't see what happens right after that, but we know exactly what happens.
So
yeah.
just to clarify, Adam, I don't mean to interrupt your retelling of the story. Jim
sure
Varney is your number one pick?
Yes, with 1 point.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, we thought this was your number one pick to get
as in 5 points, like your top pick.
Well, take your time judging me from now on, because boy, I'm sure there's egg on your guys' faces.
There's we're just relieved to hear that there's nowhere to go but up with this pick.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what you think. So my next person, number 2, with 2 points, is Florence Pugh or Pugh or Pugh.
Mm-hmm,
I've heard it multiple ways. Her performance in Midsummer is fantastic.
Okay.
And that's one of those movies that you really, you just can't look away kind of thing, because it's also one of those movies where it's like it's a creeping horror.
Right.
So like the trap has very clearly already sprung before they realize what's going on, and by then it's obviously way too late, and it's just it's ridiculous. I don't know if you've seen Midsummer.
Sure.
But from the start, it's a roller coaster of emotions with this person. And I saw it in theaters, and the second I got out of the movies, a friend of mine and I were talking, and they mentioned that their fiance was in Sweden at the time, and I said, well, I hope they don't get midsummered, and they didn't know what that meant. Went and watched the movie, and then later told me that they cried the entire movie because they were worried that was happening to their friend.
I love that you use midsummered as a verb.
Yes, that was excellent.
But yeah, Florence was fantastic.
That's a good one though. That's a really good contemporary pick. Okay.
Number 3, Toni Collette in Hereditary, another movie by the same director.
Yeah.
Ari Aster. And again, those movies are very much, grief is a huge part of those movies.
Sure.
And both Florence and Tony did such an amazing job just being bereft.
Yeah, and Toni Collette has a body of work there as well, right?
Huge.
She's also got Krampus.
Yeah.
Krampus is a great movie. I love that movie.
It is great, and she is riveting in that.
Yeah, I really enjoy watching her.
Yeah, it's something else, and she's funny.
Yeah,
like, she can be really funny, and she's like, it was watching Hereditary. I made the mistake of watching that at like 2:00 in the morning with all the lights off, because I didn't know it was like that kind of scary.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that is maybe one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, just by virtue of the fact, like, the clever things they did in terms of hiding things in plain sight.
Yeah, that is a movie with some grab you by the throat scares.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's, oh god. Yeah, just thinking about it, like, it's a little much, but it was great. And yeah, and she was great in it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, these are great picks.
Yeah, and speaking of Australia, Toni Collette being Australian, my next pick, Noah Wiseman from The Babadook. I hated The Babadook because it was so annoying, because it was on purpose. And I hated Noah Wiseman because he did such a good job of being the most frustrating, annoying child ever. Like, he honestly deserves acting awards for what he did in that movie. Like, he's done very few other things. He's done 5 movies, and this is maybe going to be what he's known for best, because from start to finish, that movie, I just wanted that kid to not be around.
That's fair.
Like, it's a horror movie, so you can kill off characters, but he was such an integral character, they couldn't kill him off. I wanted to stop watching the movie. He was doing such a good job.
Well,
I never want to meet him in person.
Kids get let off the hook in horror movies too, quite often. They tend to survive.
Yeah, I never want to meet him in person. He could be the loveliest person, but because of his performance, that's it for me. Like, it's
okay. I am totally jazzed for your number 1.
Yes.
I can't wait.
I think you mean my number 5. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, your number 1 worth 5 points.
Sure. Your last pick.
All right. It's your system. It's your system. Okay. My last top pick is, I hope I'm saying her name right, Felicia Rose. Felicia Rose? Felicia Rose.
Felicia?
Maybe. It's spelled with 2 S's.
Hmm.
Anyways, who played, now let me just remember what the actual character's name was, Angela in Sleepaway Camp, which, yeah, like, Sleepaway Camp was to me, just sort of like a typical slasher movie. And I was like, and this is like so rare. I was watching this movie with a bunch of my friends, not having friends being rare, but I was watching this movie with a bunch of my friends, and it's a horror movie, and we've got the lights on and everything, and we're making fun of it the whole way through because it's very schlocky and slashery.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we get to the final scene of the movie, and even though I'm in a room full of people and we're all in a great mood, I was like terrified, frozen in fear at the final shot even of the movie.
Yeah,
like, it had that much of an impact.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is a very by the numbers schlocky slasher horror film from that era,
featuring James Earl Jones's dad.
But that ending is not like anything else.
No. And I remember, like, after we watched that movie, I downloaded all of the rest of the Sleepaway Camp movies.
Mm-hmm.
None of them even like touch on how great that moment was.
Right.
And the first Sleepaway Camp is, of course, made better by the end of the movie. So like you sort of in your head go back and think, oh, maybe that movie wasn't so terrible, but because the ending makes up for it. But the other movies were just awful until Return to Sleepaway Camp. Yeah, and like I was surprised when I looked up Felissa Rose to see just like what have they been up to? Because like clearly they've got some kind of quality to them that keeps,
Mhm.
that at first got them the job and everything. And they've been in so many things. And looking at their IMDb, it's like 90% of it is still very much that like straight to DVD kind of quality horror movie. And she's got something like 21 movies either in post-production, pre-production, it's finished filming, she is filming. Like she's a busy person.
Today in
And I'm sure,
2021, that much.
yeah, yeah, like the last, like in 2021 alone, actually, she's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 10 things with another like 5 things coming out this year.
Wow.
It is, yeah, she's like maybe the woman version of Eric Roberts.
That
Just
is
doesn't say
that is
no.
some high praise. That's some high praise.
Yeah, and it just, yeah, so that would be my sort of top pick. And like, they didn't really like, for what they did that established that ranking on my list was
Mhm.
so small, but it was very impactful.
Yeah. No, that is awesome. That is a great list. I wasn't sure exactly what we were going to get from you.
Probably a lot of Jim Varney's.
I was, I thought maybe it could have been all Jim Varney. Yeah, but just go through his whole filmography, right? And, but this is excellent. This is a really excellent list. You've given us a lot to think about, and definitely some movies that I want to either go back and watch again or see for the first time. So there's this is good stuff. Thank you for doing this and for being part of what we're doing in our 10th episode. I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon. Have a great Canadian Thanksgiving.
Yes, you too.
And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So we have now heard from 2 of our guests. Sam, it's time for you. You're going to have to give your picks up sometime. I think now's the time.
All right. So my number 1 is Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces himself. Of course he had to be my top pick. The guy was absolutely great at what he did, and so much of the modern day horror genre, and especially modern horror monsters, stemmed from or can be linked back to him. His makeup skills and techniques were literally groundbreaking in the industry. He practically kickstarted the makeup effects industry in Hollywood. Plus, his performances in silent films were legendary. When I think of the horror genre as a whole, Lon Chaney is the first name that comes to mind. And I think he should be for everyone. My number 2 and number 3. I agree with what you said about these two sort of going together. So, Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi were actually the first 2 I picked when I started thinking up my list.
Sure.
They quite easily became iconic in their roles as Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. How recognizable Lugosi is as Dracula is even more impressive, as he only played the role twice. Lugosi and Karloff's careers, aside from their most well-known roles, are also incredible. And I hear what you're saying about Lugosi, but honestly, I have to disagree. I think you're seriously undervaluing Karloff's contributions to How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Oh, here we go.
Seriously. That movie was made in 1966 and is still a classic holiday movie that almost everyone has seen, or at least heard of. The Grinch is absolutely a horror monster, making Karloff's role one of the very first movie monsters that most kids are going to experience. So, as I'm sure you've guessed, Karloff has to be my number 2.
Okay.
And Lugosi is my number 3.
Okay.
My number 4 is Christopher Lee. He has such a large body of work, and so much of it is excellent. He is excellent. Every single character he played was a villain or a monster. Seriously, at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, when Saruman was still supposedly a good guy, he still freaked me out. He was intimidating. He was scary. He was able to play any role as if it had been pulled directly from a horror movie. And it never even felt out of place. His roles just meshed perfectly into his films while still dripping horror vibes. So I think he should definitely be on everyone's list.
So Wade, okay, so you and I were very much in sync on this, which is I guess to be expected. We watch a lot of the same films. We talk about this stuff all the time. It kind of makes sense that our lists would be very similar and our rationales very similar. Who's your number 5? Because I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I don't think you would pick Robert Englund as your number 5.
I did not.
Okay. Well, lay it on me. Who is number 5?
So I did have a different number 5, but after listening to Mom, I was really convinced. My number 5 is Jamie Lee Curtis. What Mom was saying about the idea of the final girl trope and all that coming from Jamie Lee Curtis really stuck with me. And I thought about it, and I have to agree. Plus, building off that, whenever I think of female horror actors, I immediately think of Jamie Lee Curtis. No one else. She's probably one of the more well-known ones as well. But she's also the only female horror actor that I can remember seeing in multiple movies that aren't part of the same series. So for that, I think she stands out a lot for me, and I thought she deserved a spot on my list.
That's a fantastic choice, and I know your mom will be really happy about that. But independent of that, it's a good, solid choice. I can't argue it at all. Good job.
Thanks.
Our next guest on our special 10th episode is Addison Wylie. Addison is a film reviewer, and he is the man behind WylieWrites.com. Addison, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this. I like talking about movies with people.
Yeah, well, that's kind of your thing, right?
Yeah. When I'm not writing about it, I like talking with people.
Okay, well, we... you know what this is all about. We're doing our top 5 lists for the greatest horror movie actors of all time. We're really looking forward to hearing what your lists are. We've heard some really interesting names so far.
Yes.
People we didn't expect at all.
People I've never even heard of.
Yes, we've had some of those. So lay it on us. Go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, so like in my 5th position, I have to go with Lloyd Kaufman, which is a bit of a cheat. Because he does appear in his own movies. He's primarily a director, producer. He's this grandfather figure of indie horror cinema, and very do-it-yourself headspace where his filmmaking comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of schlock. It's a lot of hilarious schlock and well-made schlock. And even if you don't like what Lloyd Kaufman puts out, you can at least appreciate how much work went into it. And there's a brilliant documentary on one of his movies called Poultrygeist. There's a behind the scenes documentary about how he ran his set, and like he's an intense dude. But he knows what he's doing, and he's hilarious when he's on screen. He's totally resourceful when he's off screen. So yeah, he definitely deserves a spot on that Mount Rushmore of horror.
Fantastic. I've always thought of him as kind of like the schlocko horror version of Alfred Hitchcock, that kind of guy who wrote himself into his own mythology, turned up in his own films, and was always himself. He wasn't sort of a character. He was him. He was the character.
Absolutely, yeah. And the people who get in productions with them kind of know what they've signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
I love that documentary on that Poultrygeist DVD. I think it's kicking around on Troma's site. If you want to see anyone listening want to see any of Lloyd's work, Troma.com. It's quite a collection of incredible work.
Awesome. We'll throw that link up in the description as well for people. That's great. Okay, give us number 4.
All right, number 4 is we have a few Canadians on this list. This is the first of them, Stephen McHattie, who burst onto my radar with his show-stopping performance in Pontypool.
Yeah,
Bruce McDonald's Pontypool. The Pontypool is an amazing horror movie. If you want to know what you can do without showing much, Pontypool is like the prime example. And then ever since Pontypool, he just has been showing up he's become this character actor who pops up in a lot of horrors and a lot of thrillers. And he really shows appreciation for the genre, and he really throws himself into the role. Like recently, he was in a movie called Come to Daddy, which I wasn't too hot on, but he was when he was in the movie, like you could not take your eyes off of him. Like, and he's great. Same thing with Darren Aronofsky's Mother. When he appears, it just, you can't take your eyes off of Stephen McHattie. He loses a few points with me recently because he kind of fouled up and really put in a stinky performance in something called Dreamland, which was supposed to be a spiritual sequel to Pontypool, which was terrible. But so he loses a few points, but I gotta always give it up for Stephen McHattie. I think he's great.
I'm a big fan of his. I first discovered Stephen McHattie decades ago in a film called Salvation, which was about televangelism. Yeah, totally love the guy, and of course he's in Watchmen.
Is he?
Yeah, he's the fellow that plays Old Night Owl.
Oh,
That's
my
right,
gosh.
Yeah. And he's totally cool in that. I know what you mean.
Yes.
He's riveting when you see him. He's very, very intense.
Yeah, and same goes with he appears in A History of Violence as well, and he just pops up in these kind of brief roles, which was really refreshing when you look back on Pontypool and you just see what he does with the leading role. He's a great actor.
Yeah, and the nice local connections there with A History of Violence and Pontypool both being very connected to the Peterborough area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good thinking on that one.
Thank
okay,
you.
Number 3.
All right, number 3, another Canadian, Catherine Isabelle, who was sensational in Ginger Snaps and really kind of put herself on the scene in Ginger Snaps, which was a Canadian werewolf movie that was spun into a coming of age, young women going through puberty and not really knowing what's going on with their bodies when they realize, Catherine Isabelle's character realizes that, hey, she might be a werewolf. From Ginger Snaps, she went and starred in American Mary, directed by the Soska sisters, and she has such a strong presence in there. And then she's done some other work on the side, like she's popped up in Freddy vs. Jason. She has a brief, not a horror movie, but she pops up in Snow Day. She pops up in a lot of these horror movies as kind of even more briefly than Stephen McHattie. But her roles in Ginger Snaps and American Mary really put her out there as this strong, female lead in these movies. And it takes her beyond gender too, just a strong lead in these really kind of messed up horror movies, like body horror movies. So it's refreshing to see an actor just throw themselves into a genre that much of a niche.
Yeah, and those are very in the case of American Mary as well, that's just an unflinching film. It would take a lot of bravery, I think, for an actress to even sign on and commit to that kind of performance.
Yeah, because it's whatever, like what her character goes through, won't give away spoilers, but it is pretty tough. It's tough to watch. And then the industry of body modification too, how she kind of sinks herself into that industry and that world.
Yeah,
where you kind of leave that film knowing, like, you go into that film and you're like, I don't understand why someone would put horns on their skull or make their fingers extra long. And then you leave American Mary and you go, you know what, I kind of get that.
Yeah. All the pieces fit together now.
Yeah.
That is a out of left field pick. That person was not on my radar at all. So that's a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, her role in Ginger Snaps is she's just amazing.
Okay, so we're down to your top 2.
Yes, I was thinking of, like, I don't really have those like Robert Englund's on my list, but I wanted someone like that. And the reason I know Robert Englund's very like a prominent presence in the horror genre and certainly deserves a spot on someone's Mount Rushmore.
I'll tell you, he's made a couple of the lists so far. Robert Englund has squeaked in at number 5 with a few people.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So like he's just such a prominent figure in the horror genre. But I'm just not that familiar with. I haven't seen a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I've seen a lot of his bit parts in other horror movies.
Mhm.
But I wanted that sort of an actor where you see him and you recognize him, you instantly think of his filmography.
He's that
And
guy.
so that's why at number 2 I have Doug Jones.
Okay.
Doug Jones, who's done like incredible body work in a
Yeah.
lot of Guillermo del Toro's movies. He was Abe Sapien in the Hellboy series.
Right.
He was in Shape of Water as the primary creature in that. But in Pan's Labyrinth, when he's that pale man, it just sends shivers down your whole body is just, you see him from far away and he just creeps up on you. And then so that work he's done in Pan's Labyrinth comes out so often in a lot of Guillermo del Toro's work. And now that we're getting near Halloween, I recently, discovered Hocus Pocus. I haven't seen Hocus Pocus in a very long time, and then revisited it recently, and it's a really fun movie. But Doug Jones pops up, and he shows that not only can he do kind of creepy body horror with body work, but he can also be really comedic while he's doing it. He knows of his presence, he knows of his range, and he's very much aware of that without being like smug or full of himself. I think he's a very modest person despite putting himself out there. So I think Doug Jones certainly deserves a spot on my Mount Rushmore.
That's fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah, great choice. Okay, drum roll. Number 1 from Addison Wylie. Go ahead.
Yes. So my number 1 is, I got to finish off with a Canadian actor. Robert Nolan is my number 1. And Robert Nolan, I first discovered in short films directed by Richard Powell, co-produced by Zach Green. And he's a creepy dude. He's funny. I've met him a few times, and this is totally taking my personal connection away from it, because I admire him so much before I actually kind of touch base with him. But when I saw him in the short film called Worm, where he's this teacher and he's got this anger boiling underneath his skin, his exterior, and he's just trying to keep everything together, and he's a really creepy personality. And then that comes out in other movies directed by Powell, other shorts like Familiar and Air. But Robert Nolan just keeps on popping up in these short films. Something called there's a movie called Eviction, directed by Justin McConnell, who that played randomly at Toronto After Dark and gave everyone the creeps. It's this locked off shot of a priest played by Nolan who is trying to exorcise himself, and he's alternating between the demon and the priest, and it's super creepy and it just gives you the chills. So he's another one of these actors where you just can't take your eyes off of him. When he pops up in a cameo role to do some comic relief in a horror thriller like Berkshire County, he breaks up the tension. You can't take your eyes off of him. But when he's doing more kind of serious, somber roles, like in something like Silent Retreat, it's you can't take your eyes off of him. He's just has a magnetic presence. He's got a really dry sense of humor when he's asked to provide that really dry wit to a situation.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got this stare too that can just stare right into you, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen from any actor, and it's a huge plus that he's Canadian.
It's great when you have actors that have that attribute you're talking about, that real watchability, even if they're not necessarily classically movie star handsome or have all that sort of marketing presence behind them, but they're just so intense and watchable.
Absolutely, yeah. And all these and he gives a lot of time and credit to these independent filmmakers who are trying to cut their teeth in the genre. And he again, like most of the actors I've mentioned, he throws himself into the role and really commits to the character that he's been asked to play, even if it's it's a short film that's going to play on the festival circuit and maybe fall off on the wayside. You're getting 100% Robert Nolan if you're the filmmaker behind that. So it's like you have to really appreciate that when you're watching these movies and you're catching him more on screen. And you just have to, you not only appreciate his acting, but you appreciate kind of his integrity as an actor.
Right. Well,
cool.
Fantastic. There's no faulting any of your picks. They're really they come from a position of expertise, which you clearly espouse, and there's something there really for our listeners to think about.
Yeah, me too. I know I want to think about these.
Yeah, and you've name dropped so many fantastic films that I think some of them I haven't seen and definitely want to check out, and I think our listeners will as well.
Oh, well, that's awesome. That's great. I know, just going through the list, I really want to finally get around to watching that Ginger Snaps trilogy. So maybe that's this year. I'll do that.
Well, it's the time of year to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for doing this and for sharing that list with us. We wish you a happy Canadian Thanksgiving, and enjoy the Halloween season, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on, guys. This was a lot of fun. I like talking to people.
Well, we'll do it again. Thanks, Addison.
You're welcome. Bye.
Our next guest on the show is Mallory Jacobson. Mallory's a podcaster, and she is one of the people behind the Movie Lovers podcast that we talked about earlier in the show. So welcome to the show, Mallory.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
So you know what we're doing. We're talking to a number of people and seeing who they would put on the Mount Rushmore of horror movies. And we are really interested to hear who you have for the list.
Well, awesome. I'm really excited to share my list with you guys. It was really fun putting it together.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my top 5 are maybe a little different than what your average, maybe like film historian might say are the top 5 actors in the horror genre or influential in the horror genre. I'm a little female heavy. I feel like I see horror through a female lens. So that's kind of the main angle that I'm coming from, just as a forewarning.
That's great. You know, one thing we've noticed talking to the other guests is people come at this from a really personal perspective, and everyone has brought their own spin to their list. And we have heard names and heard arguments behind these names that we were not expecting at all. And that diversity has been fantastic.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I think horror is such a personal genre, and there's so many different subgenres within it that you can really delve into. So yeah, everybody's got something near and dear to their heart. So that's really cool. All right. So starting off with my number 5 actor, I'm going to start off with Sissy Spacek. I think when we hear that name, we all think of Carrie. Carrie made her a horror icon, but what really kind of drew me back to her as I was looking for actors to put in this top 5 is that she's such a well-renowned actress. She's just a wonderful, wonderful icon that always pops up into my mind when I think of horror. Carrie covered in blood in Stephen King. You can't not go there.
Yeah, everyone knows that image. I think even if you've never seen the movie, everyone has seen that picture.
Yeah, she's iconic. So I had to have her on my list.
That's a fantastic start. I'll say everyone's number 5 has really been one that people have put a lot of thought into. I think because they're just trying to squeak onto the list with someone or something like that. And the number 5s have been great across the board, I think. So that's a really worthy one. Great choice.
Cool. I'm excited to hear everybody else's. This is fun. All right. So my number 4 then, staying in this actress zone, I have Jamie Lee Curtis. She paved the way for what you might call your stereotypical female horror character that we see more, well, that I saw more in my teenage and young adult years being a millennial. If it weren't for Jamie Lee Curtis and not only the Halloween movies, but, other movies that she did like Prom Night and The Fog and Terror Train, I don't think we would have the slasher film genre that we do. I mean, Scream itself specifically talks about Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, that movie's so self-aware. You almost can't even use it as an example, but she is on top of paving the way for a certain type of female character in horror. Nobody else, and I'm pretty sure she's the only one that you can say this about, she's played the character of Laurie from Halloween in 5 decades, 5 different decades. soon to be 6 from the
Yeah.
70s to the one that's coming out like
next Friday.
Yeah, oh God, perfect timing. Yeah, you don't have movies like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer and all that stuff without Jamie Lee Curtis. She's extremely influential to female characters in modern day horror, in my opinion.
Yeah, not only your opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
We're glad to hear her name. A few other people have had her on the list, and so that's great. You're in very good company there.
Yay. That's awesome. Okay, so moving on to my number 3 pick. This is my only male pick on my list, and I had to include someone that lives in the zone of monsters or creatures. Anybody that listens to movie lovers will find time and time again in movies that I talk about ad nauseum. I'm obsessed with creatures. E.T. is my favorite movie of all time. This has nothing to do with E.T., but my number 3 pick is Doug Jones. I see him as the master of modern day creatures in film. He works a lot with Guillermo del Toro. He was in Hellboy, just 2. Anyway, he played Abe Sapien in those movies. He's in Pan's Labyrinth. He's in Shape of Water. He plays the monster in The Shape of Water. When I started looking at his filmography, I was like, oh my God, I didn't know he was in that too. He played Billy Butcherson in Hocus Pocus, the like zombie guy whose lips are sewed shut. He did some, I think just maybe a single or maybe a couple episodes of Tales from the Crypt. He was on Buffy. He's in The Strain, Star Trek, What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show. He's even done a Marilyn Manson music video. He is just one of those names. He's, actors who play creatures, you might not know them as a household name, but they're in so many more things than you think.
Right. And you don't always know their face either.
Right, exactly.
It's not part of their performance quite often.
Right. And there are a lot of other actors that I found on my search looking for that one iconic creature actor. I don't know, Doug Jones just has this prolific career, and I had to include him in my top 5.
Yeah, I think considering a body of work is really important for this sort of thing. He certainly has that behind him. It's awesome choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's just amazing. I kind of want to go on a Pan's Labyrinth spree now, especially since that movie Antlers is going to be coming out soon. And that was produced by Guillermo del Toro. So, I love a good scary movie. Okay, so my number 2 pick, I feel like these last 2 picks are going to be my most personal ones. So my number 2 is Linda Blair. The Exorcist has been, such a big movie in horror history in general, but in my life, it has been the movie that has scared me the most from the time I was way too young to be seeing it for the first time when I was like 12 or something, even to today, being 32 years old. It's a movie that still terrifies me, even though I know how they did every single trick in the book. And Linda Blair is the face of The Exorcist. And I don't think without a movie like The Exorcist, we wouldn't have that genre of like horror movies that feature creepy kids, like The Ring and Pet Sematary with Gage. I know that's, based on a book. It's not necessarily just a horror movie. But then you have more recently, like the movie Hereditary with the character of Charlie. I don't know, I will always think of Reagan first when I think of horror movies that feature children. But then also when you look at the possession genre, which is the genre of horror that freaks me out the most for some reason. That's my top scary horror genre. But Linda Blair, I don't know, I feel like you can't talk about horror movies without talking about The Exorcist at some point.
Yeah, that is very true. The Exorcist is a seminally scary film, and you're right, it touches on 2 things. Your points are very well made. The idea of children that we are afraid of, and because children can really occupy that place as an other in cinema, because they're not the adult experience, right? We've all lost the ability to be a child. But also the possession aspect. Like the possession genre owes so much to The Exorcist, and we still see it all the time, right? And yeah, the idea of it, the perversion of the body, your body being taken away from you, that makes for scary films every time.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, yeah. And unfortunately, it always makes me sad when I think of Linda Blair and how she never really was able to overcome the infamy of The Exorcist. So I don't know, whenever I watch it, I always kind of have that in mind, like, would she have made it if she knew the impact it was going to have on her life? We'll never know.
And it's hard for child actors as well, right? It's sort of a dice roll for them because you just don't know how they're going to grow up.
Right. Yep. So, yeah, I had to have her very high on my list. My number one pick, I feel like, is probably my most historic person on my list. I feel like everyone else is relatively a bit more modern, 70s and newer. But my number one, I had to have Elsa Lanchester, who was the Bride of Frankenstein. I've thrown around the word icon and iconic a few times, but when you think of the original horror monster movies, she is the female character, period. Yeah. She is the grandmother of all female horror characters. She's been an icon for almost 90 years. In 2025, the movie Bride of Frankenstein will be 90. And what is so interesting to me, though, is that she's one of the most fleeting characters ever. It seems like, for how famous she is, she's in the movie for like less than 10 minutes. It's insane.
Yeah.
And I actually, throughout my life, I had seen bits and pieces of Bride of Frankenstein. I am a bad film student and have not sat down and watched every single one of those great, Universal monster movies. And this was one of those ones I had never really taken the time to just sit down in one sitting and watch the whole thing. And last summer, I think, a really cool art house theater here in the Twin Cities did a showing of it. And I got to see it on the big screen, and it was so cool. And I was just floored that she wasn't in the movie more. Like, oh my, how is she so, everybody knows that face and that scream and that her hair, and she's barely in the movie at all. Blew my mind. I also thought it was really, really cool. If you're just watching it quickly and you don't nerd out over every tiny little detail like us movie nerds do, you might not notice that there was dual casting going on, with Elsa Lanchester playing Mary Shelley in the prologue, and then also plays the bride in the end, which is super cool. So that is my long-winded explanation of Elsa Lanchester being the bomb. I really think it's cool too, thinking about that movie, and like, until you really dive into those old original horror movies, one might think that those movies would play it safe because they are so old and the effects were limited, and all the terrible violence that's in movies now wasn't really in those movies as much. But I feel like it's such a bold move to build her up that much and then to just have them all, crumble. And I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody listening to this, but that they die in the end. So she's only around for a moment and then she's gone, and the whole movie's about her. Yeah. It's really tragic and a bold move.
It is. It's very cleverly written. And I don't think we'd see a lot of things like that today, for sure.
Yeah.
And Sam's smiling. You can't see, but she's Sam uses a picture of Elsa Lanchester as the bride as her Instagram profile picture.
Yeah. So. Oh yeah, that's awesome. Love it.
Well, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to meet you and talk to you. This list is fantastic, and we're looking forward to unpacking it and seeing how this fits in with what everyone else has given us, and what we can, what sort of summary we can provide at the end of it all.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun, and I'm really glad I got to dig into exploring this awesome topic more. I learned a lot doing all the research. So thank you.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks so much. And we will talk to you again, hopefully sometime soon.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
So that was really interesting. Like, we spoke to 4 people on the show, and technically we had a major contribution from a 5th.
It wasn't what I expected.
Better or worse?
Well, better, certainly. But I mean, just in terms of what we learned and the answers we received.
I know what you mean. I don't feel we achieved any kind of real consensus, though.
That's right. If we just total up the point values and follow the system, we get 4 names, sure.
But they're 4 names largely generated by you and I.
And Mom.
Mm-hmm.
And the plan for this wasn't for it to be the Mount Rushmore of horror movies according to our household.
No, definitely not.
So, what have we accomplished here then?
I think we've learned something about trying to generate a best of list of any kind. We're going to have different picks based on the individuals picking them. Everyone has different favorites, and subjectivity looks different to different people.
And you only know what you know. You can only really evaluate what you've actually seen or read about or been told.
So maybe that's our accomplishment. We've put forth a number of names, representing an incredibly vast body of work over a century of cinema, and we can basically say to our listeners, go watch this stuff. Movies with these performers are enjoyable for any number of reasons. And if you're looking for watch recommendations, here you go.
That's a pretty good takeaway.
It's probably the best we can do.
What about the Mount Rushmore? Have we just scrapped that idea?
No, I don't think so. I think we're just adding more faces.
4 isn't enough.
It was never enough. 4 is way too arbitrary a number. Why not 5?
Or 10.
Or 20?
And what if our listeners have a name they'd like to add?
Drop it in the comments, and that person makes the cut. Everyone has personal favorites that make the cut for any number of reasons. And you know what? That's cool with me.
Me too.
So, that brings it to a close. Our big 10th episode.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Back to movies next week, though, right?
You bet. And since it's October, we'll be throwing monster movies your way for the rest of the month.
Awesome. And if you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments. Did you like this format? It was definitely something new for us, but if you enjoyed it, it might be something we can do again.
Oh, for sure. I totally would. To everyone out there, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate the support. And especially to our Canadian listeners, happy Thanksgiving.
And remember, as always, if you enjoyed what you heard, you don't have to keep it to yourself.
We are not a secret. You can tell everyone about us.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might like debating horror movie actors as much as you do.
Maybe even more. For Sam the Sidekick, I'm Derek, and I love old movies. Sound effects used for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, come from freefx.co.uk. Images are found through the Creative Commons, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, comes from The Crux.